Hello and welcome to a new tutorial in my channel. Today I will show you step by step how to crochet this gorgeous raffia market bag. This style is so versatile that works well with bright or dark colors, basically with every color that you can think of. So, without further ado, let's jump into the tutorial. For this bag, you will need approximately 270 grams of raffia and a 8 mm hook. You can find all the links to the materials in the description box. I started with slip knot and crocheted 40 chain stitches. The chain stitches will probably look a bit loose. The hook is quite big and need to go through them. So don't try to make tight chain stitches because you will have difficulties on the next row to insert the hook. Once you finished 40 stitches, skip the first chain and insert the hook on the second chain from the hook and pull a loop. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops on the hook. Please place a marker on this stitch since it's the first stitch of the row and the marker helps a lot. Since this bag is worked with herringbone stitch, to crochet that stitch we need to insert the hook at the second loop of the previous stitch where the needle enters and also on the next chain as shown. So insert the hook on the second loop of the previous stitch and on the next chain, yarn over and pull a loop through the chain. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. This is the second stitch. Now the stitch has 3 loops. Insert the hook on the third loop and on the next chain. Yarn over and pull a loop through the chain. Now you have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over again and pull a loop through all the 3 loops. This is the third stitch of the row. For the rest of the chain stitches, repeat the same pattern of the third stitch. Find the third loop of the last crocheted stitch, insert the hook in the third loop and in the next coming chain. Yarn over and pull a loop. Yarn over and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Your work will look like this. Continue this pattern for the rest of the chain stitches. In total, you will have 39 herringbone stitches for the first row. This row is also the right side of our crocheted panel. Once I finish 39 herringbone stitches, 1 chain and turn my work on the other side, which is the wrong side. On this side, we will keep the yarn on the front and insert the hook from the back to the front and pull the loops on the back. So skip the chain and insert the hook from the back to the front on the next stitch. Leaving on top of the hook the V stitch. Pull a loop through from front to the back. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops on the hook. Again, put a marker on this stitch since this is the first stitch of the row. Now for the second stitch, insert the hook at the second loop of the first stitch from the back and on the next coming stitch, from the back to the front, as shown. Then yarn over and pull a loop through the coming stitch. Once you have 3 loops on the hook, Yarn over again and pull a loop through the 3 loops on the hook. This is the second stitch of the row. For the third stitch, find the third loop of the last crocheted stitch and insert the hook on the third loop of the stitch and on the next coming stitch, back to front as shown. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops. Keep repeating the pattern of the third stitch to the end of the row. At the end of the second row, you will have 39 herringbone stitches. At the end of the second row, 1 chain and turn your work on the other side. Now we work on the right side. Skip the chain and insert the hook on the next coming stitch. Yarn over and pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops. This is the first stitch of the third row. Then insert the hook on the second loop of the first stitch of the row and the next coming stitch as shown. Then yarn over and pull a loop. Yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops. This is the second stitch of the third row. Then for the third stitch, insert the hook at the third loop of the second crocheted stitch and on the next coming stitch of the previous row as shown. Pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through all the 3 loops on the hook. This is the third stitch of the third row. Keep repeating the pattern of the third stitch to the end of the row, in total 39 herringbone stitches. Your work will look like this. Once arriving to the end, we will crochet 3 more chain stitches, so that we can increase 2 more stitches on the next row. The next row is a wrong side row, so we keep the yarn on the front. Insert the hook from the back to the front and pull the loops at the back. For the fourth row, skip the first chain, insert the hook from back to front, pull a loop, yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops. This is the first stitch of the row. Place a marker, then insert the hook at the second loop of the first stitch of the row from the back, then in the next coming chain, pull a loop through, and lastly, to finish the stitch, yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. This is the second stitch of the fourth row. For the third stitch, insert the hook on the third loop of the last crocheted stitch, then from back to front on the next stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop at the back, then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops. This is how your work will look like. Repeat the pattern of the third stitch to the end of the row. At the end of the fourth row, you will have 41 herringbone stitches in total. Once you arrive at the end of the 4th row, 1 chain and turn your work. Now we work a right side row, the 5th row. Skip the chain and insert the hook on the next stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops on the hook. Place a marker and insert the hook on the 2nd loop of the 1st stitch and in the next coming stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. For the 3rd stitch, insert the hook in the 3rd loop of the 2nd stitch and in the next coming stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through all the 3 loops on the hook. Keep repeating the pattern of the 3rd stitch to the end of the row. In total, 41 herringbone stitches. At the end of the 5th row, we crocheted 3 more chains so that we can increase 2 more herringbone stitches on the next row. For the 6th row, turn your work, skip the 1 stitch chain from the hook, insert the hook at the next chain, back to front, and pull a loop. Yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops on the hook. This is the 1st stitch of the 6th row. For the 2nd stitch, insert the hook at the 2nd loop of the 1st crocheted stitch from the back and the next coming chain, back to front. Yarn over and pull a loop. Yarn over again and pull a loop through all the 3 loops on the hook. This is the 2nd stitch of the row. For the 3rd stitch, insert the hook at the 3rd loop of the previous crocheted stitch from the back and then at the next coming stitch of the previous row, back to front. Then yarn over and pull a loop at the back. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Repeat the pattern of the 3rd stitch to the end of the row. At the end of the 6th row, you will have 43 herringbone stitches. This is how your work will look like at the end of the 6th row at the wrong side. For the 7th row, 1 chain, turn your work, skip the chain and insert the hook on the next stitch after the chain. Yarn over and pull a loop, then yarn over again and pull a loop through both loops on the hook. For the 2nd stitch, insert the hook on the 2nd loop of the 1st stitch and on the next coming stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop. Then yarn over again and pull a loop on all 3 loops on the hook. For the 3rd stitch, insert the hook on the 3rd loop of the previous crocheted stitch and on the next coming stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop through the next stitch. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Repeat the pattern of the 3rd stitch to the end of the row. At the end of the 7th row, you will have 45 herringbone stitches in total. Once you finish 45 herringbone stitches, crochet 3 more chains and turn your work. Now we work on the wrong side, the 8th row. Skip 1 chain, insert the hook from back to front and pull a loop on the second chain from the hook. Yarn over again and pull through the 2 loops on the hook. Place a marker at the first stitch of the row and then insert the hook at the second loop of the first stitch from the back and then at the next chain. Yarn over and pull a loop at the back of your work. Then yarn over again and pull through all the 3 loops on the hook. For the third stitch, insert the hook at the third loop of the previous crocheted stitch and at the next coming stitch of the previous row. Yarn over and pull a loop at the back of your work. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Repeat the pattern of the third stitch to the end of the row. In total 45 herringbone stitches for the 8th row. Once 45 herringbone stitches are finished, 1 chain and turn your work to crochet the 9th row. Skip 1 chain and crochet herringbone stitch on the next stitch. Keep crocheting 45 herringbone stitches to the end of the row. At the end of the 9th row, we crochet 22 chains for the extension of the handle. Once you finish 22 chains, turn your work, skip the first chain from the hook, and crochet single crochet on the second chain from the hook. Place a marker at the first stitch of the 9th row and continue crocheting 1 single crochet on each chain for the coming 18 chains. In total, 19 single crochet stitches. Then once you have 2 chains left from the 22 chains we crocheted previously, switch to herringbone stitches. So insert the hook back to front, since 9th row is a wrong side row. Yarn over and pull a loop. Then yarn over again and pull a loop in both loops. This is the first herringbone stitch of the 9th row. Place a marker. Then insert the hook on the second loop of the first herringbone stitch from the back and into the next coming chain of the previous row, back to front. Yarn over and pull a loop on the front. Then yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. For the third stitch, insert the hook in the third loop of the previous crocheted stitch from the back, then in the next coming stitch of the previous row from the back to the front. Then yarn over and pull a loop at the back. Yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Repeat the pattern of the third stitch to the end of the row. In total 47 herringbone stitches. Once you arrive at the end, 1 chain, turn your work, skip 1 chain, then insert the hook on the second stitch from the hook. Yarn over and pull a loop at the front, and again yarn over and pull a loop through the 2 loops on the hook. Place a marker at the first stitch of the 10th row. Then insert the hook on the second loop of the first stitch and on the next coming stitch of the previous row. Pull a loop in the front. Yarn over again and pull a loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Repeat the pattern of the third stitch until you have 45 herringbone stitches in total, leaving the last 2 herringbone stitches without crocheting, so that we can have a more nice effect, since we are going to decrease 2 stitches every 2 rows on this side of the handle. Once you finish 45 herringbone stitches, crochet 1 chain, turn your work and start to crochet the 12th row, which is the wrong side row. Skip 1 chain, insert the hook on the next stitch from the back and crochet a herringbone stitch. Place a marker and continue crocheting a herringbone stitch on the next stitch, back to front, until you arrive at the end of the row. In total, you will crochet 45 herringbone stitches for the 12th row. At the end of 12th row, crochet 1 chain, turn your work and start crocheting 1 herringbone stitch on each stitch until you have 43 herringbone stitches in total. This is the 13th row and we leave 2 stitches without crocheting at the end. After you finish 43 herringbone stitches, crochet 1 chain, turn your work, skip the chain and start crocheting 1 herringbone stitch on each stitch to the end of the row. This is the 14th row. This is a wrong side row and at the end of it we have 43 herringbone stitches in total. Once we finish the 14th row, crochet 1 chain and turn your work to crochet the 15th row on the right side. Skip 1 chain and start crocheting 41 herringbone stitches for this row, leaving the last 2 stitches without crocheting. For the 16th row, 1 chain, turn your work, skip the first chain from the hook and start crocheting 1 herringbone stitch on each stitch to the end of the row. In total, you will have 41 herringbone stitches for this row, which is a wrong side row. To start the 17th row, again 1 chain, turn your work and crochet 39 herringbone stitches on the right side. Leaving 2 stitches at the end of the row without crocheting. For the 18th row on the wrong side, keep crocheting 39 herringbone stitches, same as the 17th row. Once the 18th row was finished, half of the pattern was finished. The other half is by repeating the same pattern from row 2. I will leave for you the full written pattern on my website and you can find the link to it on the description box below. Here is the full panel once I repeated the pattern to do the other half of the panel. The width was 41 centimeters. Now I will go 1 more row of herringbone stitches around all the edges and handles as pointed to refine the look of the increases and decreases made. There is not an exact pattern for that, but first I just crocheted 39 herringbone stitches to one side of the bag. Then, where I had noticeable edges, I tried to work around them, sometimes crocheting 2 herringbone stitches in one stitch, sometimes crocheting a high and a bit loose herringbone stitch, as you can see, modeling and putting stitches with the fingers in place. There is no exact pattern for this, you just have to crochet as you go. This is how the edges of this side looked like once I was finished. Then I went around the handle chains and crocheted herringbone stitches on each stitch on both sides of the base chain. I continued refining the edges all around the other sides as well, crocheting herringbone stitches all around. Once I went all around the edges, my work looked like this. For this bag you will need 2 panels with the same pattern. At the second panel you don't need to cut the yarn, because you can continue attaching the panels of the bag by crocheting like me. But feel free to just sew them in case you don't want to crochet them. So here are my 2 panels, both right side facing upwards. Place one panel on top of the other, making sure that both panels have their right side on the inside. Then I will crochet the 3 pointed sides and the handles as shown at the end. For the attaching of the sides, I pulled the loop of the last crocheted panel through the other crocheted panel, making sure that both stitches correspond, and started crocheting with a 3.5 mm hook all the 3 sides of the bag. I crocheted with single crochet all the stitches on both sides of the panels, making sure that the stitches on both sides correspond. Then, once all the 3 sides were attached, I pulled the last stitch and cut the yarn. Then I turned the bag from inside out. Then lastly, with a tapestry needle and some raffia yarn, I sewed the handles with a very simple stitching as shown. Once both handles were sewn, I made sure that all the ends were hidden and cut. And that was it. So, how does it look like?